Amelia ran a security empire in Seattle and believed money could buy every layer of protection anyone would ever need. In a glass-walled boardroom, she mocked Mason, a quiet single father and former soldier, calling him a man who lived off a past that no longer mattered. That same night, her convoy was led into an abandoned stretch of the waterfront. Every signal dropped, and one by one her professional guards vanished without a trace. When Amelia finally understood that her entire security team had betrayed her, the only person who turned back was the man she had just humiliated. Seattle sat under a gray afternoon rain, the kind that never quite committed to a downpour, and the glass tower of Orion Systems threw long reflections across the wet street below. Inside, the air was cool and carefully controlled, filtered through systems the company itself had designed and sold to half the corporations on the West Coast. Orion was not just another technology firm. It built the locks, the cameras, the encrypted networks, and the private guard systems that protected hotels, banks, and data centers up and down the coast, and its name on a contract meant something to the people who signed them. Amelia stood at the center of that world, young for her position but never uncertain about it. She was preparing to close the largest deal of her career, a sweeping agreement that would place Orion's protection systems inside dozens of new properties across 3 states. Everything about the day had been arranged around her: the presentation, the guest list, the security detail that moved with her like a second shadow. That detail was led by Hunter, a broad-shouldered man with an easy smile and a habit of standing just slightly too close to remind people who was in charge. His team traveled in armored vehicles, spoke through encrypted earpieces, carried personal tracking devices, and moved Amelia through the world in carefully rehearsed layers, each one designed to absorb whatever threat the last one missed. Mason existed in an entirely different layer of that same building. He was a contract driver filling in for a sick colleague, and on slower days he handled small maintenance jobs for the hotel hosting Amelia's presentation, fixing wiring, adjusting panels, keeping the unglamorous machinery of the place running without complaint. His jacket was worn but clean, his manner quiet, and there was nothing about him that asked for attention. He moved like a man who had spent years learning to be unremarkable on purpose, his eyes tracking exits and cameras out of old habit rather than any current assignment. At one point his phone buzzed in his pocket, a missed call from his daughter Hannah, and he glanced at the screen only long enough to feel the small ache of not answering before, sliding it away and returning to his work. He carried that ache quietly, the way he carried most things, and nobody in the hotel noticed it pass over his face. Grace, Amelia's assistant, was one of the few who noticed Mason at all. She saw the way he positioned himself near service doors and stairwells, always with a clear line to an exit, always aware of who entered a room before they finished entering it. It struck her as strange for a man fixing outlets, though she said nothing. To Amelia, Mason was invisible in the way that people who kept buildings running were often invisible to people who ran companies. Whatever he had once been did not interest her. What mattered now was competence measured in contracts and net worth, and by that measure he did not register at all. Near the end of the afternoon, Mason glanced briefly at a printed evacuation diagram posted near the service hallway and noticed, almost without meaning to, that one of the marked exit routes did not match the building he had worked in for months. He mentioned it once to a passing security staffer, who nodded without listening and walked on. Mason did not push the point, he simply filed it away, the way he filed away every small thing that did not add up, and went back to work, unaware of how soon that detail would matter. The VIP conference room on the top floor had been arranged for investors. With soft lighting and a wall of glass overlooking the harbor, Amelia stood at the front, confident in a way that filled the room without effort, telling the gathered guests that the era of human instinct protecting important people was over. What mattered now, she said, was data sense and algorithms working together faster than any person ever could. Mason stepped in briefly to fix a minor electrical fault in the presentation panel, murmuring to a nearby technician that the backup signal had been rerouted onto an unsecured line. It was a small, practical observation, the kind he made without thinking twice. Hunter overheard him and laughed. He asked, not quite quietly enough, whether Mason had once been in the military, then added that a few years in uniform hardly qualified anyone to understand a security system worth millions of dollars. Amelia joined in without hesitation. She said coolly that men like Mason often confused old battlefield memories with present-day competence. The room absorbed her words the way rooms absorb the words of powerful people, with quiet agreement and a few polite smiles. Then came the line that would follow her for the rest of the night. She told him he was a single father living off a past that no longer applied, not a man capable of protecting anyone's future. A ripple of soft laughter moved through the investors. Mason did not raise his voice. He set his tools down carefully, looked at Amelia for exactly one steady moment, and said that even the best system in the world was useless if the person holding it was led down the wrong path. Then he turned to leave without waiting for a response. Amelia took the remark as an insult rather than a warning. She told Hunter to have him removed from the VIP floor immediately, and Hunter moved fast, clearly relieved to have an excuse to assert himself. Grace did not laugh with the rest of the room. She watched Mason's face as he walked away and saw something closer to disappointment than anger, which unsettled her more than his words had. In the hallway outside, while being escorted out, Mason noticed one member of the security detail quietly exchange an access badge with someone he did not recognize. He memorized the stranger's face without saying anything, aware that an accusation without proof would only get him thrown out faster. Hunter caught up with him near the service elevator and shouldered past him hard enough to make a point, warning him to stay away from the CEO's schedule for the rest of the evening. Mason only replied, evenly, that if the schedule were truly secure, Hunter would not need to threaten a man for fixing a wall outlet. Hunter's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more, watching Mason disappear down the service stairwell with an irritation he could not quite explain to himself. Somewhere behind that irritation was the faint, unwelcome sense that he had just been the one who sounded threatened, not the one doing the threatening, and that thought stayed with him longer than he wanted it to as he returned to the floor above. By evening, Amelia was preparing to leave the hotel for a private meeting near the Seattle waterfront, described to her as the final step before signing a contract expansion worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The plan called for a central route with private security support and 2 vehicle changes along the way. A route hunters team had rehearsed for weeks. Grace noticed something wrong before anyone else did. The schedule on Amelia's tablet had been quietly updated. The destination shifted from the agreed meeting point to an old warehouse near the docks. She flagged it to Hunter immediately, but he told her the change had come from higher up, approved directly by Amelia herself. Grace did not fully believe him, but she had no authority to intervene, and the convoy was already preparing to leave. Mason was pulled into the arrangement almost by accident, called in to drive a backup vehicle after another driver reported sudden illness. It was the kind of coincidence that felt unremarkable at the time, a scheduling gap filled without anyone thinking twice about who filled it. Hunter did not want him anywhere near the convoy, but placed him at the rear of the formation anyway, treating him as excess weight rather than a threat. As the vehicles pulled away from the hotel, Mason noticed 3 things that did not sit right with him. The lead car was driving closer than protocol allowed, the radio frequency switched without any warning broadcast, and one of the secondary security vehicles quietly dropped out of formation before they had even left downtown Seattle. Amelia sat in the lead vehicle, arms crossed, still irritated that Mason's presence in the convoy felt like a personal insult after the humiliation she had handed him only hours earlier. She called Hunter directly and told him to make sure Mason did not come anywhere near her again after what had happened in the boardroom. Hunter promised her everything was under control, his voice smooth and certain in a way that no longer matched what was actually happening around them. At the rear of the convoy, Mason's phone lit up with a short message from Logan, an old teammate from his years in service. The message was brief. That particular radio frequency had once been used to simulate emergency withdrawals during training exercises, a signal meant to look like protection while actually clearing a path for something else. Mason understood then that this was no longer a technical glitch. Someone had built a route designed to look secure while leading Amelia exactly where they wanted her. He reached for the radio to report what he was seeing, choosing his words carefully so as not to sound like the man who had already been mocked once that day. Before he could finish the transmission, the entire frequency dissolved into white noise, drowning his voice completely. He set the radio down slowly, jaw tight, eyes scanning the darkening road ahead. Rain had begun to fall harder against the windshield, blurring the taillights of the vehicles in front of him, and somewhere beneath that blur, Mason could feel the shape of a trap closing in around a woman who did not yet know she needed him. The convoy turned into an abandoned stretch of the Seattle waterfront, a maze of old shipping containers, flickering yellow lights, cold rain, and the distant call of a foghorn somewhere out on the water. The place felt emptied of purpose, the kind of location no legitimate meeting would ever choose. The lead vehicle suddenly cut its lights, lost contact, and turned down a side lane without explanation. Hunter's voice crackled over the radio, telling Amelia it was only the outer perimeter team performing a routine check. Mason knew immediately that this was a lie. No competent security detail voluntarily separated from its primary target in an area with degraded signal. Not without a reason someone was hiding. The second vehicle stopped, reporting engine trouble. 2 guards stepped out to inspect it and disappeared behind a row of containers moments later. There was no shout, no gunfire. Nothing but a silence that felt far worse than either would have been. Amelia's composure began to crack. She demanded that Hunter report the position of every member of the team, deflected, claiming the whole unit was simply repositioning for better coverage, his voice a fraction too fast to be believed. Mason eased his own vehicle forward, using it to block a side turn and buy distance for Amelia's car. Hunter's voice exploded over the radio, ordering him not to act without authorization, but Mason had already stopped listening to instructions from a man he no longer trusted. Without warning, Amelia's vehicle locked itself from the outside, the remote system overriding the doors, the windows darkening, her position vanishing from the tracking map. Grace was watching back at the company office. Grace stared at the screen as the dot representing Amelia disappeared, followed one by the dots representing the rest of the security team, until the map showed nothing but empty water and empty streets. Hunter performed a convincing imitation of panic while actually guiding Amelia out of her vehicle, in a direction he had clearly planned in advance. Mason watched from the shadows as a stranger received a signal from Hunter's phone, confirming what Mason had already suspected. This was not a violent kidnapping meant to make headlines. It was something quieter and more efficient, a plan built to erase a CEO from every system that tracked her without ever leaving a visible trace. Mason parked his vehicle in a pocket of darkness, cut his headlights, removed his official earpiece, and switched entirely to watching with his own eyes and instincts, the tools he trusted most. Somewhere behind the layers of noise and rain, a version of himself from years earlier surfaced quietly, a version that had once known exactly how to move unseen through spaces built to keep people out. Inside the fading light near the lead vehicle, Amelia turned to look for the team that had surrounded her every day for the past 2 years, the guards she had paid generously and trusted completely. Rain streaked down her face as she realized, one heartbeat at a time, that not a single one of them remained standing beside her. For the first time since taking control of Ariane's systems, Amelia felt the full weight of a truth she had never allowed herself to consider. That every layer of protection money could buy was only as strong as the loyalty of the people paid to provide it, and tonight that loyalty had simply walked away. Amelia was brought into an old warehouse near the harbor, the kind of building that had long since stopped serving any legitimate purpose. She tried to hold on to the posture of a CEO, demanding that Hunter explain himself, but her voice had already begun to lose the certainty that usually carried it. Hunter dropped part of his mask at last. He told her almost gently that her own arrogance had blinded her to how many people inside her company wanted her gone. It was not personal, he said, only business handled the way business was sometimes handled. Then Xavier stepped forward. He was not a street criminal but a polished, cold-eyed rival from the business world, a man who had quietly bought the loyalty of part of her security team in order to force her into signing over control of a core division. He made his intentions clear immediately. Killing her was never the plan. Making her disappear long enough for the board to believe she had panicked or lost her grip, or simply chosen to walk away would accomplish everything he needed. Amelia realized with a cold clarity that Hunter had sold her schedule, her access codes, her camera blind spots, and every route she had ever trusted him to protect. She reached for her smartwatch to send an emergency signal, only to find the connection already blocked. Xavier smiled and told her that her systems protected everyone else beautifully, but had never been designed to protect her from her own greed and blindness toward the people closest to her. Outside the warehouse, Mason moved carefully, tracking small details rather than obvious ones. A smear of mud across the concrete, a security camera angled slightly wrong, a metal door closing with a rhythm that did not match the wind. He did not rush toward the building. Years of hard experience had taught him that charging in alone would only put Amelia in greater danger, not less. He called Logan on an old personal line they had kept between them since their service days. Logan confirmed that this stretch of the harbor still had a network of old service tunnels, connecting to a pump station and a nearby warehouse, forgotten by most modern security plans because no one had bothered to update the maps. Mason reached Grace through a short, careful call, asking whether Amelia was wearing anything that did not depend on the company's main network. Grace remembered almost as an afterthought that Amelia still wore an old executive badge with an outdated locator chip, a piece of hardware everyone considered obsolete and had long stopped paying attention to. A faint, tired smile crossed Mason's face in the darkness. The very technology Amelia had dismissed as worthless was about to become the thread that led him straight to her. Inside the warehouse, Xavier pushed a signing tablet toward Amelia, the transfer document already loaded and waiting for her signature. She stared at it without moving, buying time in the only way left to her, aware that every second she delayed was a second closer to either rescue or ruin. The cold in the warehouse had settled into her bones by then, and somewhere beneath the fear she felt something closer to grief, a slow recognition that the empire she had built with such certainty had been hollow in exactly the places that mattered most. She thought of every decision that had led to this room, every warning she had waved away because it came from someone she considered beneath her attention, and for the first time in years she allowed herself to wonder whether competence without humility had ever really protected her at all. Outside, unseen and unheard, Mason had already found a narrow service entrance built decades earlier for workers who had long since retired or moved on, a forgotten seam in a building everyone else believed was sealed tight. He paused at the threshold, listening to the rain and the distant hum of machinery, and stepped through into the dark. Mason moved through the narrow service corridors beneath the harbor complex, a world of flickering lights, dripping pipes, rusted metal, and faded maps peeling from the walls. He kept his pace steady and unhurried, staying clear of anywhere he sensed a guard might be posted, using the sound of rain and distant pump machinery to cover the quiet rhythm of his own footsteps. A brief memory surfaced as he moved, one he had carried for years without ever speaking of it aloud. He had once been part of a rescue mission that ended in failure, where he lost a teammate because an overconfident commanding officer refused to listen to a warning, given at exactly the wrong moment. It was the reason he had not argued back in the boardroom earlier that day. He had learned long ago that being right in a conversation mattered far less than being right in the moment that counted. He was not invincible, and the story never pretended otherwise. An old injury in his shoulder ached with every sharp movement, forcing him to pause once to catch his breath against a cold metal wall, and at one point he came close enough to a patrol that he had to freeze completely still in the shadow of a support beam until it passed. Back at the company office, Grace refused to sit idle. She pulled an archived copy of the original travel schedule and compared it line by line against the version everyone had followed that night, confirming that Hunter had altered the route before the convoy ever left the hotel. She sent Mason a short message through the old line Logan had helped her access. Hunter changed the route Amelia never knew. Reading it, Mason understood the full shape of what was happening. Amelia was not only under attack from the outside. She had been betrayed by the very person she trusted most to keep her safe, a betrayal built slowly enough that she never saw it forming around her. Inside the main warehouse, Xavier continued applying pressure, his voice calm and almost bored, telling Amelia that she had humiliated too many people over the years for anyone to genuinely want to save her tonight. It was a cruel thing to say, and it landed exactly where he intended, striking at the quiet fear she had never let herself examine too closely. That she held enormous power but very little real loyalty from the people around her. Deeper inside the complex, Mason found a locked side room where two loyal members of the security team had been confined after refusing to take part in the betrayal. Their presence confirmed something important. Not everyone on the team was corrupt, but the system meant to protect Amelia had been carefully split apart from within, weakened just enough in just the right places. He freed them quickly and quietly, but asked them not to charge forward instead. He wanted them to carry evidence back out and protect Grace once she reported everything to the proper authorities. It was a small moment that revealed something essential about him. He had no interest in playing the lone hero. He understood that real order had to be rebuilt from whoever remained trustworthy piece by piece, not seized single-handedly in one dramatic gesture. The two guards hesitated, uncertain about leaving him behind, but Mason's calm certainty convinced them faster than any argument could have. As they slipped away toward the outer fence line, Mason turned back toward the sound of voices deeper in the warehouse, aware that the next few minutes would decide far more than just Amelia's fate. They would decide whether the entire betrayal collapsed under its own weight, or finished exactly as Xavier had planned it. Amelia tried to stall for time, pretending to study every clause in the transfer document as though the wording itself might save her. Beneath her calm exterior, the confidence that had once defined her had quietly transformed into something rawer. The simple instinct to survive one more minute. Xavier's patience began to thin. He repeated the exact words she had used against Mason in the boardroom earlier that day, the line about people who lived off the past being unable to protect anyone's future. He added, almost amused, that at least Mason had been smart enough to walk away rather than end up trapped in a warehouse, like this one. At that moment, the warehouse lights flickered violently. A side door opened and closed on its own, and Hunter's head snapped toward the sound, realizing someone had already made it inside. Through the haze of dim light and blurred glass, Amelia caught a brief glimpse of Mason's outline. She felt something close to disbelief. The person returning for her was not her expensive security detail, not the board of directors, not any private police force money could summon. It was the very man she had humiliated only hours earlier. Mason did not rush toward her immediately. Instead, he created confusion, quietly unlocking several doors so that Xavier's people would believe multiple intruders were closing in from different directions at once. Hunter's fear outpaced Xavier's. He understood in a way Xavier did not yet grasp that Mason was no ordinary employee, and for the first time that night he began to suspect he had badly misjudged the man he had mocked so easily back at the hotel. Amelia heard Mason's voice come through the warehouse's old speaker system, low and steady. He told her simply to get down when the lights went out. It was the moment Amelia had to choose. Trust the man she had once dismissed with such careless cruelty, or continue clinging to the illusion of control she had always relied on. She chose to trust him. The lights cut out completely, and in the brief chaos that followed, described here with restraint rather than violence, Mason pulled her from her chair and guided her into a side corridor before anyone could react. Running beside him, Amelia noticed for the first time how completely he read the world around them. Every exit, every echo of a footstep, the cold draft slipping through a barely open door, the uneven breathing of whoever might be following. She finally asked why he had come back for her at all. Mason did not offer some noble speech. He simply told her that he knew exactly what it felt like to be left behind, and that was reason enough. Amelia said nothing in response. That single sentence struck her far harder than every accusation Xavier had thrown at her that night, harder even than her own private fear of losing everything she had built. They broke free of the main room only to find themselves caught between two impossible directions. Ahead lay a sealed harbor gate with no visible way through. Behind them, Hunter was already gathering men to give chase, his voice sharp with the particular urgency of a man who knew his entire plan was beginning to unravel. Mason pulled Amelia into the shadow of a stacked row of containers, pressing a finger briefly to his lips as footsteps echoed somewhere behind them. Rain hammered against the corrugated roofing above, blurring every sound into a single restless rhythm, and for a moment neither of them spoke, listening instead to the approaching danger and searching the darkness for whatever thin opening might still exist between the locked gate ahead and the men closing in from behind. Mason led Amelia through the container yard and the maze of service corridors beyond it, the ground slick with heavy rain, the air filled with the groan of metal shifting somewhere in the dark and the distant call of a ship's horn out on the water. At some point, Amelia lost one of her heels or simply pulled them both off to move faster, and the small detail carried a weight neither of them spoke aloud, the last piece of her polished, powerful image slipping away as she ran barefoot through danger like anyone else might. Mason did not scold her for slowing them down, and he never once brought up what she had said to him earlier that day. His silence on the matter said more than any accusation could have, and it left Amelia more ashamed of her words than any lecture would have. She tried to apologize as they moved. Mason told her the apology could wait, because it meant nothing if they did not survive the night to make it matter. Hunter managed to cut off one exit ahead of them and called out over a loudspeaker, offering Mason a deal: hand Amelia over, and he would be paid enough money to provide for his daughter for the rest of her life. Mason faltered for a single heartbeat at the mention of Hannah, but greed never had a real chance of moving him. He answered that his daughter did not need money built on betrayal to grow up well. It was one of the most emotionally charged moments of the entire night, and still Hannah remained entirely off-screen, present only as the reason behind everything Mason refused to do. Xavier ordered every gate around the harbor sealed. Back at the office, Grace had already sent evidence of the altered schedule to the proper authorities, but she knew it would take time for anyone to arrive. Logan called Mason again, telling him the only remaining route out ran through an old pump station leading toward the riverbank. Mason understood the path was flooded and dangerous, but it was still better than turning back toward the men behind them. Amelia began actively participating in her own rescue rather than simply following along. She remembered an old access code for an equipment room, one Xavier's people had apparently forgotten to disable, and used it to help Mason open a side door that would otherwise have cost them precious time. Inside that room, they found 2 more loyal security guards locked away in a cold storage area. Mason chose to free them despite the delay it caused, unwilling to leave anyone behind simply because rescuing them slowed him down. In that moment, Amelia saw the difference between Hunter and Mason laid bare in front of her. Hunter had protected her only because he was paid to. Mason risked everything to save people who held no importance to him at all beyond the simple fact that they needed help. The small group made it outside, but they were spotted almost immediately. A tense chase unfolded through the rows of shipping containers, rain streaking sideways in the wind, shouted commands echoing off metal walls. Mason used quick, deliberate misdirection to pull attention away from Amelia, giving her and the 2 guards a clear path to run ahead while he peeled off in the opposite direction. For a long, terrible moment, Amelia believed she had lost him for good. She heard the heavy clang of a steel door slamming shut somewhere behind them, swallowed almost instantly by the sound of rain, and she stood frozen at the edge of the container yard, staring back into the darkness where Mason had disappeared only seconds before, waiting for some sign that he had made it through. Amelia wanted to turn back for Mason immediately, but one of the loyal guards urged her to keep moving towards safety first. For the first time that night, Amelia refused to act in her own narrow interest. She said plainly that Mason had come back for her, and she would not simply leave him behind in return. It marked a genuine turning point in who she was becoming. The woman who once assumed other people should sacrifice themselves for her sake was beginning to understand that loyalty only meant something if it was returned in kind. In a smaller section of the warehouse complex, Hunter finally confronted Mason directly. He mocked him openly, calling him a washed-up soldier the world had long since forgotten, a man reduced to fixing wiring and driving other people's cars for a living. Mason answered without raising his voice, telling Hunter he clearly did not understand what a veteran actually was. A veteran, he said, was not someone who lived in the past. He was someone who had already seen the true cost of abandoning the people beside him, and who never intended to pay that price again. Hunter revealed that he knew part of Mason's old service record, that Mason had once designed extraction routes during a specialized operation, then left the military entirely after refusing to cover up a commanding officer's serious mistake. Xavier had hoped to use that history to discredit Mason if he ever tried to speak up publicly. Mason did not deny any of it. He said his past was neither a medal to display nor a wound for anyone else to use as leverage against him. There was a weight in the way he said it, the weight of a man who had spent years refusing to let other people define him by either his failures or his service. He had walked away from an institution that valued loyalty to rank over loyalty to truth, and he had never once regretted the choice, even when it cost him comfort, recognition, and the easier life he might otherwise have had, standing in that cold warehouse. Facing a man who thought threats could still move him, Mason felt nothing but a quiet, settled certainty in who he had chosen to become. While Hunter's composure slipped, Mason quietly activated a small recording function built into Amelia's old executive badge, a device still capable of transmitting locally even though everyone had assumed it was outdated and useless. Amelia, now back with Grace on an emergency call, listened as Hunter openly admitted to selling the travel route, disabling the security signals, and accepting payment from Xavier in exchange for delivering her straight into the trap. The twist landed hard. Grace had already forwarded the recorded confession to the board of directors and to law enforcement in real time. Hunter believed he was holding Mason as leverage in a private standoff, when in truth he was confessing to everything in front of an audience he did not know was listening. Hunter tried to run. Mason cut him off in a brief, controlled confrontation that the story chooses not to dwell on in graphic detail. What mattered was not violence but precision. Mason moved fast, exact, calm, without a single wasted motion, the product of years of training finally surfacing in full. Amelia arrived just as Hunter was subdued, and she saw Mason with a light injury but very much standing. For the first time all night, she said his name with real respect, not the dismissive tone she had used back at the hotel. Xavier, sensing his plan collapsing, moved to activate one final contingency. He intended to release a story to the press claiming Amelia had disappeared due to a mental breakdown, framing Hunter as the loyal guard who had tried desperately to save her. If Amelia failed to reappear within the hour, the board would be pressured into approving a temporary transfer of control over the company. Mason understood immediately that surviving the warehouse was not the end of the fight. Escaping Xavier's trap meant nothing if Amelia could not return to Orion Systems before that deadline passed, and the paperwork quietly stole from her everything the Knight had already tried to take by force. He looked toward the harbor gate, calculating distance and time, and told Amelia they needed to move now. There was no room left for hesitation, no time to process everything that had just happened between them. Whatever understanding had grown in the last few hours would have to wait until they were both standing somewhere safe. And right now, safe was still a long way off. Mason, Amelia, Grace, and the two loyal guards made their way back toward downtown Seattle in an old harbor utility vehicle, nothing like the polished convoy that had carried her out earlier that night. It was this unremarkable vehicle, rusted and unglamorous, that ultimately returned her to a position of power no amount of expensive machinery had managed to protect. Along the way, Amelia watched Mason drive in silence and realized something important about him. He had never once tried to prove he was better than anyone else. He simply did what was right at the moment. Everyone else chose what was easy. At the Orion Systems building, Xavier was already in an emergency meeting with the board, telling them Amelia had disappeared after impulsively altering her own schedule and was no longer fit to lead the company. Several board members exchanged uneasy glances but said nothing, unwilling yet to challenge him outright. The conference room doors opened. Amelia walked in, soaked from the rain, exhausted but very much alive. Behind her stood Mason, Grace, and the recorded proof of everything that had happened that night. The room fell into complete silence. Several people who had been nodding along with Xavier moments earlier slowly turned to look at him. Instead, the shift in the room almost physical in its weight. Amelia did not raise her voice or perform outrage for the crowd. She used the same calm she had learned from Mason over the last several hours to lay out the evidence piece by piece. The altered schedule, the blocked signals, the deliberately fractured security team, Hunter's payment from Xavier, and the forced signature Xavier had demanded from her at gunpoint of circumstance rather than an actual weapon. Hunter was brought in already restrained by law enforcement, all of his earlier arrogance stripped away completely. Xavier tried one last counterattack, bringing up Mason's military record and suggesting that Amelia was now leaning on a man with a controversial past rather than sound judgment. Amelia cut him off immediately. She said that she herself had once used those same cruel words against Mason, and that she had nearly died that very night trusting people with polished records instead of people with genuine character. It was a public reckoning and a necessary one. Amelia apologized to Mason in front of the entire board, not to win back his approval, but because she had finally truly understood how wrong she had been. Mason did not use the moment to humiliate her in return. He told her simply that an apology only meant something when it changed how a person treated those who held no power over them. In the days that followed, Amelia canceled the compromised security contract, opened a full internal investigation, protected every guard who had refused to betray her, and began building a new emergency response program grounded equally in real field experience and basic human decency. She offered Mason a position as lead advisor for the new program. He did not accept right away. He told her plainly that he needed a job that let him get home on time to Hannah, a brief Gentle mention that kept his daughter exactly where she belonged, off to the side of the story rather than inside it. Amelia agreed without hesitation and without condescension. She built the offer around genuine respect, flexible hours, real authority over ethical standards, and a clear rule that no one at Orion Systems would ever again be permitted to look down on the people who kept its buildings and its people running. Weeks later, Mason walked out of the Orion Systems building in the same simple jacket he always wore. Amelia stood beside him in the Seattle rain, all the cold, polished distance gone from her expression. She asked him quietly why he had come back that night after everything she had said to him. Mason answered that good people did not only rescue those who deserved it. They rescued whoever needed rescuing. Amelia said nothing for a long moment, visibly moved in a way she rarely allowed herself to be. The story closed there without rushing toward romance or forcing any grand declaration, leaving behind only a quiet sense of respect, gratitude, and the possibility that two very different people had permanently changed the course of each other's lives. Not far away, a newly trained security team practiced under principles Mason himself had helped establish. This time, the system protecting Orion Systems was not built on money or arrogance, but on loyalty, discipline, and truth. The man once mocked as someone who lived in the past had become the very foundation of Amelia's future, and Amelia, who once believed money alone could buy every form of protection, finally understood that what had truly saved her life was a man she had underestimated but who chose, without hesitation, to turn back. The rain over Seattle continued long after that night, steady and unremarkable, the same rain that had once hidden a betrayal now simply falling over a city that carried on as it always had. Somewhere in that city, a little girl waited for her father to come home on time, unaware of everything that had happened, unaware that the quiet, careful man who tucked her in at night had, only weeks before, walked into darkness for a stranger and walked back out again with his integrity fully intact. Stay until the very end, because Mason's hidden past will slowly cost Amelia every ounce of her pride and control.